Hey, how's it going everybody? It's me RP again, and this video has been something of a very late addition to my channel because a lot of people have asked me what my thoughts are on my Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled for quite a long time now, and I never really found the time to actually be able to shoot the entire video because of some little hiccups that I encountered along the way, especially while filming and of course finding time to shoot this. So let's begin. I've owned this Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled since last year, 2021, around July. It's a 2018 model. So if you were to look at the entire Ducati Scrambler line, there was the initial production that started in 2015. The Desert Sled itself came out in 2018, but then in 2019 and above, there was a bit of a update to the entire line that changed some things around. Very minor improvements to the actual Ducati line as a whole. So I will be mostly talking about my Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled from the perspective of the pre-update line of this motorcycle. Now let's start with some of the basic specifications of the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. I'm just going to use my phone because I am not able to remember a lot of things at the top of my head nowadays. The Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled comes in at 209 kilograms. That's with all the fluids in. It has a 803cc L-twin single overhead camshaft, of course a 2-valve Desmo drumming system. Okay, so unlike most modern motorcycles, the Scrambler Desert Sled, as with all the Scrambler models under Ducati's lineup, they are all air-cooled, but it has a tiny oil cooler to help with the circulation of heat. The bike itself produces 75 horsepower at peak power and 68 Newton meters of torque. Now the tank itself is only 13.5 liters in capacity, and if I were to give you a rough estimate as to how much consumption it gets on a day-to-day basis, just expect something along the lines of 18 to 19 kilometers per liter. Now the front suspension is of course fully adjustable, and the rear is preload and rebound adjustable. Alright, so let me get down to some of the more nitty-gritty little item-based things that I have to say about the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. We'll begin with the dash first, since that is probably the first thing that you're going to be seeing when you're riding. Now you have of course the clock, the odometer slash trip meter slash well, the air temperature sensor as well, and then you have of course your speedometer as well as the digital tachometer and a warning sign for the side stand. You get a warning light for low petrol. I think was it here? Yeah, it was. It's here on this side, as well as your ABS light, oil pressure gauge, neutral light. And if you have issues with the bike, oh sorry, the fuel light is here, sorry. This is the where the check engine light comes into play. Now first of all, being a 2018 model, there are some features that are missing here that would eventually be revised and updated in the 2019 model and beyond, namely a proper fuel gauge. As you can see on the 2018 and prior models of any other trim of Ducati Scramblers, they don't have a actual fuel gauge. There isn't a gear indicator. Most of those will be added in during the 2019 update. So if those things are issues that plague your decision making, I would say you could possibly choose to go for a 2019 and beyond model of a Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. Although definitely with that update, the price difference between a 2018 and a 2019 is a bit of a gap of about several thousand in Singapore at least. Next thing I would like to talk about, the controls. The controls on the 2018, basically all the scramblers from 2015 to 2018, the controls here, ignore this. This is an aftermarket fog light switch. Most of them are garbage. I really hate the particularly this turn signal indicator, and I in particularly hate the starter button. Both of them are garbage. They don't connect very well. The build quality of the entire housing as well as the buttons themselves feel extremely cheap. Again, like the digital cluster, the controls on the left and right, the starter switch, the turn signal light buttons, the horns, they are all updated in the 2019 model. Another thing I also hate is the horn button for the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. Again, feels very flimsy. You can see how much flex there is in this button. I mean, on many bikes, this isn't really that important to be built properly, but for premium motorcycle like a Ducati Scrambler, it's something that I can't really abide by, and I wish this was done better from the start instead of having it fixed in a future update. Not to mention, it's so goddamn small, especially if you're wearing gloved hands, and so out of the way that most of the time you end up fumbling just to reach the horn button when you need it. On the bright side though, you do have hazard lights on, although unlike most really well designed hand controls like my Kawasaki Versys-X 300, which has a dedicated button for this requires you to push the turn signal left and held there for 4 seconds to activate the hazard lights, which is a pain in the ass, to be honest. Now let's get on to the foot pegs. This is probably one of the things that I like about the motorcycle stock. The foot pegs for the rider as well as the pillion, they are both I would say grooved. As you can see over here, they are grooved. You can pull out this rubber bung for riding off-road and then put it back on when you are riding on the road for comfort. The rubber itself is pretty good quality, nice. I think it's comfortable. It doesn't really send vibrations to your feet. As far as I can tell, even though I'm rocking this Aniki Adventure tires themselves, so there's not much vibration there. Taking them off for off-road is a very good plus for a stock pair of foot pegs, which I kind of enjoy, and I think it was a good design decision. However, there is only so much you can do with stock foot pegs. They are not grooved aggressively enough to provide really good traction in muddy terrain, especially if you have boots that are entirely clumped onto thick mud and you're putting your feet on these pegs. There is still going to be a possibility your feet might slip off while you're riding, but otherwise, for let's say wet boots, they provide pretty good amount of traction. Now, putting aside the lousy introduction that I gave, now I want to start with talking about it as an off-road bike. I'm going to be splitting this up actually into several sections, talking about how it performs in different applications that I conceivably think most people would use this bike for. So the first one would of course naturally be off-road performance, because it has the Scrambler and the oxymoronic Desert Sled moniker to its name. The Desert Sled itself is actually rather capable as an off-road bike, but this is sort of a generic blanket statement. As a machine, yes, it has a lot of potential, it has a lot of capabilities off-road. The suspension is actually very good, there's a lot of travel to it, and there's quite a lot of ground clearance to actually overcome several obstacles. But there are a tiny bit of issues that I have with the design of the bike, namely in the fact that instead of having given it a 21/18 wheel set, it still maintains a 19/17 wheel set that does not exactly perform very well in more trickier terrain where you are trying to attempt to climb on rocks or basically overcome obstacles at a slightly higher speed. Now, it's not to say that with 19/17 you can't do that, but 21/18 wheel sets definitely make it a lot easier for you. There is also the other issue with the Scrambler's weight. Now, the Ducati Scrambler is weighing in about 210 kilograms at last count. The thing is, while this weight is not exactly unique, I'm really sorry that I had to wait until the plane passed by. I really hate how Singapore is a very noisy country to begin with. Oh, anyway, as I was saying, it weighs in at close to 210 kilograms, and while this weight category isn't particularly rare amongst bikes of this displacement category, it does not help when you are going off-road, especially when you consider that the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled is quite devoid of a lot of things that would originally make something like the Tenere 700 or KTM Adventure 890 weigh roughly the same thing, namely the plethora of electronics, plastics, windscreens and all that stuff that actually adds on to that weight. But for a bike that is quite naked in its design, that added weight I feel is kind of an annoyance that could have been shaven off somewhere with lighter material design, considering the price point that you're paying for this particular model. So while the bike itself is very capable of going off-road, I really like how the ground clearance and the suspension actually makes a lot of things off-road manageable. On top of that, it has actual grooved foot pegs and a brake lever, to allow you to grip on to your foot pegs in wet and muddy terrain. It still has issues as a motorcycle for beginner or intermediate riders. So unless you are somebody that has worked your way up on smaller bikes and pushed yourself to a higher limit and have a higher standard of riding, the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled doesn't actually make you feel very confident off-road, especially once you are talking about trying to crawl over rock gardens. It's a bit sketchy, it's a bit scary. On top of that, when you are looking at the fact that it is a very slim bike, the bike has a very slim profile. When it tips over on an incline, it is incredibly hard to pick it up when combined with this 209 kilogram weight that is mostly placed at a higher part of the bike, basically higher center of gravity. Whereas compared to something like a BMW 1250 GS with its boxer engine, yes, it's a massive beast of a machine, but if you were to drop it on an incline at a relatively slow speed, it's going to at least stay somewhat upright. Easy enough for you to get it up on its wheels and off the engine casing and slowly roll it back down and try your luck again. But this thing, if you were to fall at a wrong angle on an incline, it is a pain in the ass to get it back up, and I know how it feels because I had it happen to me once, and I didn't really enjoy the amount of effort that I had to take to pick this behemoth up. However, when you were to just look at it as a green laning motorcycle, I would say it's very enjoyable. The suspension kind of makes it so that a lot of the shock doesn't really travel up. It's got very good ergonomics to allow you to control the bike quite easily on the dirt, especially on slippery and gnarly surfaces, I would say. So there is quite a lot of potential there on the off-road side of things. But on the design, there is also another issue that I wanted to point across, is that the stock belly pan, is really thin and it's really small. You might want to consider getting something more substantial if you're actually going to take it off-road on more technical terrain. On top of that, the oil filter is kind of just pointing downwards, and the head of it is millimeters away from the belly pan. Any impact to the belly pan is very likely going to cause your oil filter to crack. It hasn't really happened to me, but it's a huge possibility, and I think that might be a huge failure point. So if you were to take it on to any terrain where you are possibly going to have to lay it on the belly pan or the underside of the bike as you, let's say, climb a log, do try to be mindful of this fact and not place undue impact or stress on that point, because I fear that might leave you guys stranded in that particular case. But otherwise, as a green laning bike, it is a perfectly great bike to use in most of the case. One thing I should probably mention as well is that ABS on the entire Ducati Scrambler lineup can be disabled. There are no special ABS modes on the Scrambler for off-road use. It is either on or off. And the menu to get to the ABS settings aren't that intuitive. However, on the bright side, your ABS setting is remembered by the bike even when you shut it off. So you do not have to go back into the menu every time you need to turn ABS off after a spill. Just remember to turn it back on when you are back on the road. Now let's talk about long distance travel then, because as far as I am concerned, the entire Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled production line has mostly screamed adventure bike to me, despite it not having the frills of being an adventure bike, because the Scrambler moniker is kind of well, not really that suitable by itself, because a lot of the other trims in the Scrambler lineup feels more scramblerish, as if you took a road bike and then slapped on some off-road parts. But the Desert Sled itself feels very pre-built to be a adventure bike, minus the fairings and the windshield and some of the electronics that you would find on modern large capacity adventure bikes. So I can see people thinking of using this motorcycle for long distance trips, especially since it has an actually very capable L-twin. The Scrambler's 803cc L-twin is very comfortable all across the rev range, with enough grunt to actually propel you forward in short bursts, and then it actually can maintain a very decent cruising speed comfortably for long periods of time. So the engine itself is very good for long distance trips. However, there is one issue with using it for long distance, namely in the fact that its 13.5 litre tank is incredibly small, and when you pair it with its 18-19 km per litre consumption, you are going to expect to have to stop and top up every 230 kilometers at best. I mean, or at worst, I would say. The fuel light tends to come on at roughly 180 to 190 kilometers of travel after that. So if you were planning a road trip, that adds quite a lot of stops to your itinerary, and it can be very disruptive, especially if your friend group is mostly traveling in things like the Tenere, the KTM 690, 790 Adventures, or BMW GSs, where they can actually go a lot further on a single tank of petrol. So that is one annoyance I have with the bike. However, when I said in the previous application with the off-road, the 2118 not being on this kind of hampers its ability off-road. The 1917 wheel set actually is the reason why I consider this an adventure bike, because the 1917 on this, coupled with the form factor and the ergonomics, makes the bike actually very, very nimble, very easy to control on the road. I wouldn't say the seat itself is very comfortable. The bench seat is horrible. If you have the chance to replace the bench seat with something else, please do so. But otherwise, the ergonomics of it, the 3-point contact you have with the bike, for somebody on my height, I'm roughly, at last count, 178 to 180 centimeters tall. I really don't really know anymore. It's very comfortable. You are going to have a very upright position with a lot of space for your legs, and your legs aren't going to be bent up in any awkward position. But I would say, for the most part, many adventure bikes are going to be rather comfortable. So this isn't exactly a amazingly unique selling point of the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled itself. However, one thing I might want to point out is that as a long distance bike, yes, the Ducati Scrambler is air-cooled. And so far as I am concerned, the bike itself has not managed to overheat, even though it kind of emits a lot of heat around it because of its large engine and the lack of any liquid cooling. The bike itself doesn't really shut down unexpectedly. Mechanically speaking, it's reliable in that regard when it comes to heat management. However, it is an issue if you are wearing gear, and which most often happens when people are on long-term trips, that heat for some reason kind of has a huge searing pocket on your left ankle. So if you're wearing any boots, my left boot on the ankle, on the inside ankle, is melted off because for some reason that particular part of the bike is so hot that the Gore-Tex weave on my boot has kind of seared off and it's revealing the Kevlar underneath. Now I want to talk about city riding for now. If we were to use the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled as a practical form of point-to-point transportation. Now, in my opinion, the Scrambler Desert Sled is a very good point-to-point piece of transportation. It is very nimble, it's very slim. If you are in a country like mine that allows for lane splitting, it is actually very easy to do so on this because the entire bike sits up very high. So for the most part, you are never going to be accidentally hitting people's mirrors because your handlebars, even though they are wide and very good for leveraging the bike, making it nimble in the process, they are not on the same level as most car mirrors that are being sold nowadays, unless you come up to a Ford F-150 Raptor or a race car or a lorry. Then that might be an issue, but otherwise it's a very good bike for lane splitting. And as I have mentioned before, the 1917 wheel set plus the stock suspension setting, I have not adjusted the suspension setting whatsoever. It is very nimble. It is not as squirmy and overly soft as some adventure bikes that are being sold stock with their stock suspension settings, it's got a very good compromise of being rigid enough to have that nimble feel to it. So on a day-to-day basis, as a daily driver, I kind of like it. When we are talking about the ability to control, it's quite easy to leverage the bike itself at speed and change directions. It does change directions very easily. However, I would like to say that as a bike to be used in all weather, there is one thing that kind of annoys me. The rear tail section of the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled is too short. If it rains, if the road is dirty or sandy or muddy for whatever reasons, there is a tendency for your rear wheel to, I mean, it happens to all bikes, the rear wheel will kick that up, but the Scrambler Desert Sled's rear end is not designed to block that. Yes, I have a tail tidy on the Scrambler Desert Sled, but the original plate display, whatever you call that tail tidy, had no effect on preventing gunk being kicked up by your rear wheel from hitting you in the back. The tail itself is not long like most dirt bikes, so the shit just hits you in the back. It does not have a proper rear fender like on most adventure bikes or road bikes. So all of it just gets on your back if you're using it as a day-to-day rider, especially if you're riding in the rain, you're riding on less than ideal, less than clean roads, which is pretty much what most people encounter most of the time, unless you are living in some clean utopia, which Singapore definitely isn't one of, to be honest. So that is kind of an issue. If you are riding this bike and that is an issue that bothers you, you might end up having to put a rear rack and a box to block all the gunk from flying into your back, or actually wearing a waterproof coat over your shirt, your clean pressed shirts, and so on and so forth. Otherwise your back will just get all wet and muddy and dusty. For me, I wear a jacket that I just clean once in a while, so not an issue, and I don't generally travel as much as most people do because I work from home. So to some extent it does not impact me as much as others. Then there is also the issue of the heat, as I did mention in the long distance segment of this video. The heat itself, while it's not going to shut down the bike, in city riding where you are expected to start and stop, it gets incredibly hot. During long distance travels, you don't really feel that effect because most of that heat is being blown away by the wind behind you. You don't feel that. But in start and stop traffic, you actually do feel it if you're not wearing jeans. And I do recommend that at least if you're riding a motorcycle, always wear at least jeans. But if you don't, all the power to you. I respect your decision, but you'll feel immediately that it is incredibly painful and uncomfortable to ride this motorcycle without any form of leg covering, especially on the inside of your thigh and your right calf, because that is where the exhaust routes out to. And yes, there is a modicum of heat shielding on the stock exhaust pipe, but it's not really enough when the heat is so intense it radiates out onto your leg that it feels like a burn. So it is not to say that after talking about quite a few negative points about this bike that the Scrambler Desert Sled is a bad bike. The Scrambler Desert Sled and the rest of the Scrambler lineup, like most of the modern Ducatis, ever since it has now become part of the Volkswagen umbrella of companies, it is actually mechanically reliable compared to many of the older original Italian handmade Ducatis of the 90s and earlier. The Scrambler Desert Sled is incredibly mechanically reliable up to a certain point. Now, I have an issue with primarily the oil filter, as well as some of the wiring on the hand controls. Now, the hand controls, I think I did mention before that the hand controls are not very good. The quality of the build is very bad. Cancelling the turn signal lights takes a bit of wiggling around to actually get it to cancel. The start button requires you to push it at different angles to get that connection to touch each other. But that is mostly solved, I think, in the new 2019 update with their new hand controls. The oil filter, the OEM oil filter, is not as huge of a problem because it is a consumable. However, you need to take note that the moment you buy this, if you buy it brand new or if you buy it second hand and the OEM oil filter is still on this motorcycle, change it out immediately, because the OEM oil filter sold by Ducati that is used by almost every modern Ducati motorcycle nowadays, like the Monza, they all have a tendency to break at the seal and start leaking. I recently changed my oil filter a few months ago, and within 3 weeks it started dumping oil out of the oil filter because the seal that the oil filter was screwed into the oil pan itself started to break and leak out oil. So every time the engine turned, it would just push the oil out and dump it on the ground, and it caused me to nearly fall. Actually, it made me actually fall once in the parking lot because the oil just dumped as I was moving off, and my tire just hit the oil patch and I fell. So it's a very, very dangerous piece of equipment to have on this bike, especially with the direction the oil filter is being pointed in, which is namely downwards. However, there is two non-practical aspects of riding a Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled where I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with the bike. In fact, I feel like the Scrambler Desert Sled is uniquely made for these two segments, alongside with the vast majority of the rest of the Scrambler lineup, barring some of the other design decisions like the suspension and wheel sizes. And that is number one, supermoto racing, that is on a supermoto track with half dirt and half tarmac sections on the course. The Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled, like I did mention before, is very nimble, it's very easy to control, and at the same time it does have very good suspension to handle jumps, as long as it does not cause you to land in the middle of where the belly pan is. But on most supermoto tracks where it's a very clean jump for you to do, this bike is, I think, really suited to that task. It's got a very linear power delivery that I would say is very easy to control, gives you a lot of torque when you need to accelerate without it being unmanageable, even when you whiskey throttle it, full throttle the bike, and then it has a very predictable acceleration range across the gears. So I think when it comes to racing, it in a supermoto track, it kind of has a very fun and engaging aspect to it that I think is highly suited for. The other thing that I can think that many people that want to buy this bike might be able to use it and actually find great pleasure in its characteristics is in stunting. It's got very good suspension, considering that it's fully adjustable to allow you to customize it to your heart's desire with regards to how it should or should not behave. it's got enough torque to let you, just do power wheelies if you want to. It's easy to handle, easy to control. There's a lot of leg room if needed, and most of all, it has very little parts that stick out and that are easily to damage. So I would say that it falls into the same category as many reasons why people buy a supermoto to stunt on, because it is less likely to be damaged in a fall, which the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled actually behaves like. This thing with a slim profile, if you drop it, it's very unlikely that you are going to hit anything critical, and I think it's a very good choice for people that want to stunt on something that has more power than a 400cc supermoto or 250cc supermoto, assuming if they are trying to move up the ladder to something better. I don't know, I'm not in the habit of getting in the mind of what stunters think like, but that is something that I think they might conceivably want to use it for, and I think the characteristics of the Desert Sled do lend itself to that particular purpose. Now, if you enjoyed this video, do give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below if you agree or disagree with my analysis of the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. If you enjoy what I do, do remember to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace out. Bye bye.